So our speaker today is Dr. Hank Lucas from the Robert J. Smith School of Business. He's the Robert H. Smith Professor of Information. He received his BS from Yale and an MS and PhD from the Sloan School of Management at MIT. Professor Lucas' research interests include IT-enabled transformations, disruptive technologies, impact of information technology in organizations, IT in organization design, and the value of information technology. He is the author of a dozen books and more than 70 articles in professional periodicals. Topics include impact of technology, information technology in organization design, decision-making for technology and information technology and corporate strategy. He was the Vice President of Publications for the Association for Information Systems, AIS, and Editor-in-Chief of the AIS Electronic Journals, Communications of AIS and Journal of AIS. Today, he will discuss The Search for Survival, Lessons from Disruptive Technologies, which was published by Prega Publishers in 2012. So please help me welcome Dr. Hank Lucas. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. This book actually came out of a sabbatical leave, and so I came back and recommended to the dean that we would all be more productive if we had more sabbaticals. Didn't get very far, but that's fine. Okay. So, survival is, for me, about organizations and institutions and industries that are confronted with a disruptive technology. And so the symbols we use here are things like life rafts and life buoys and things of that kind. And I think an image, sometimes a graphical image, helps you remember a little bit about a talk. And so the next image I'm going to put up here is going to be one that is really, you want to think about more with disruption. And since we're in this water theme here, there's a saying among voters that a bad day on the water is better than a good day in the office. Okay? This is a really bad day on the water. Okay. So this is something we don't want to see happen to organizations and how they're going to end up. Okay, so what's going on? There are disruptive technologies out there, and a disruptive technology often comes from an innovation that someone else has done, and it is so compelling that people just abandon what they've been doing traditionally and adopt this new technology. And that becomes very disruptive to incumbents in the field. Okay, so this is a model from the book. Before I go into the details of the model, I'd like to ask you all a question, that is, what do Kodak, Borders, and Blockbuster all have in common?
Oh, yeah, they went.
They're all bankrupt, right? Okay. Very iconic companies, well-known brands and that sort of thing. So, can we explain some of that? And that's what we're going to talk about at first. And then we're going to talk about a disruption for a potentially well-known university that we might be familiar with. Okay. So what happens in this model? We have an innovator who comes along with a product or a service or a business model and create something that is a real dilemma for the incumbent. The dilemma is, what do I do if I'm the incumbent? And listed down here are a series of factors that inhibit an effective response from the incumbent. And let's go through those, okay? Denial. We're all very good at denial. So people at Kodak sat around Rochester and said, you know, digital photography is really going to be of interest only to the professional photographer. It's not going to catch on in the consumer market. Okay. History. So how do you go to the chairman of Kodak and say, your company is only 120 years old and has been successful and is a well-known brand around the world, but you got a problem coming? Not going to be a hard sell. Okay. Resistance to change. I take this very personally, all right, because on the sabbatical, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes why I came to this conclusion, I suddenly realized that I was being disrupted. Okay, and that's not a very comfortable feeling. And I actually, this last fall, taught a totally online class in our part-time program. I'm currently teaching a blended class, and starting on March 25th, I'm teaching a Coursera course on disruptive technologies. None of that has been a lot of fun. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's been fun but it's also the kind of thing where you say, after having taught for 200 or 300 years, why am I doing this now? Okay. Mindset. What's the film business like? Any ideas? What's film made out of?
It's
Not well today it is, in the old days.
Polyester film.
Polyester film, right? Is there anything digital about film?
Not back then.
No, okay. So we got a whole bunch of people in this company who think analog chemical processes. They don't think digital. So their mindset was not into the digital world. We talked about brand. What was probably the best known brand in the world at one time? You ever been any place that didn't have a box of Kodak film? The hot dog vendors, right, on the streets would have hot dogs and film. They'd like you to buy the film, right, because it's a better margin for them. Sunk costs, my accounting colleagues say ignore sunk costs, right? You shouldn't consider them. But if you're sitting there with a few thousand stores, or the largest industrial park on the East Coast with lots of factories on it that make paper and film and chemicals, it's kind of hard to ignore them to say, hey, maybe we don't need this stuff anymore. Profitability. There's a quotation from about the 1980s or 1990s from an executive at Kodak who said, it's hard to think of anything that's legal that has the margin of color film, the profit margin of color film. So they were making a lot of money. And again, it's hard to argue with someone who's making a lot of money that down the road there's going to be a real problem for you. And then lack of imagination, because all of these companies just couldn't imagine what the future was going to be like, and they couldn't come up with a strategy to deal with it. Okay? So let's start with Kodak. It was founded in 1880. Okay? The first snapshot camera came out in 1888. It was for wealthy people. It was $25 for a camera that was loaded with 100 pictures. That was a lot of money back in those days to take pictures. The thing that really blew open photography was the Brownie in 1900 for the price of $1. The thing was actually made out of cardboard. $1 billion in sales by 1962. By 1976, Kodak had 90% of the market for film and 85% for cameras. That can make you a little arrogant. Okay? Steve Sasson, and this is the thing that's really fascinating. Steve Sasson at Kodak invented the first digital camera in 1975. Okay? In 86, they had the first megapixel digital camera. So what's Kodak like? Well, from the descriptions of it, it's a very bureaucratic company, lots of layers of management. Now, I know we don't have any experience with that personally. This one I thought fascinating. People held meetings before meetings to be sure there'd be no controversy in the official meetings. We haven't gone that far yet, at least in the business schools I'm aware of. Paternalistic, again, an analog versus a digital company. So what happened in 2012 was Kodak filed for bankruptcy, 130 years later. They had about 7 restructurings between 1983 and 93. They had a new CEO every few years. They invested $1 billion in digital photography, but could never get it all together. They could never make it work for them. In 1990s, Kodak sold 1 billion rolls of film. In 2011, it sold 20 million. Now, I don't think you need an MBA to realize that a 98% drop in your core business in 10 years is really bad news. That does not augur well for the future. This is what their sales look like, a steady downtrend. This is the one that I find really sad. This graph begins at about 138,000 employees. I've got another statistic that says that at their peak they had 145,000. Down here they're under 20,000. So over 100,000 people lost their jobs or retired early, maybe earlier than they wanted to. And if you think about that, that's probably families, that's probably 300,000 people affected by this over a 10, 15-year period. That's a pretty good sized town, actually. Kodak Today. Anybody know what Kodak Today is?
patent litigation company.
They just sold their patent portfolio. Okay. Which is kind of like selling your arm, right? They had a patent portfolio that they valued at $2.5 billion. They got a little over 500 million. So along came Antonio Perez, who was head of Hewlett Packard's printer division. And so his new strategy for Kodak was to become a printer company. They had some imaging talents. Kodak had a technology that let them build an inkjet printer in which you did not have to replace the heads on the printer when you replaced the ink. So they could have lower priced consumables with their printer, so they charged a higher price for the printer. Some people question whether your strategy should be to go up against the most powerful company in the industry, as far as printers are concerned, but maybe you could find another product. Now, to his credit, they started building large, high-speed commercial printing presses, which have a nice margin to them, but they also turned out to be very hard to automate, the assembly of them, so it was not a great product for them. 2012, after the bankruptcy, chief financial officer left along with some other employees. They got down to 13,000 employees from 145,000. They've sold their patent portfolio. I don't think this company is going to last. I think actually they're selling their DeskJet printer business, so half of his strategy has just been sold. So I think it's very unlikely that Kodak will be around in 5 years. So what went wrong? Well, I think Kodak thought it was in the film business, and it was really in the imaging business. And different ways to work with images came along. Very bureaucratic structure, a history of success with their analog products, very high profit margins. Carly Fiorina, who's one of our graduates, we interviewed her about Kodak, and she said, Kodak was just sitting on a mountain of cash. And that meant that they felt they didn't have to listen very much to what was going on. Very strong brand. Senior management tried to focus on digital products, but they weren't very successful at it. Losing 100,000 employees is a tragedy for them, but it's also a lot of knowledge walking out the door. So you lost all of that as well. And I think by and large that all of the people in the senior ranks of Kodak didn't understand the internet. And why do I say that? Because digital photography not only changed the camera, it changed the whole process of capturing images. So now, instead of taking 3 or 4 pictures of something and throwing out the ones you didn't want, you took 10 or 15 pictures of it and you deleted the ones you didn't want, and then you downloaded them to the internet and sent them to 100 friends, and no place did you touch film in that process. And I don't think Kodak really got that. Eventually they bought Ophoto. They tried to get into the business, but I think they were always following something, and they were out there leading. Okay. And as Carly Fiorina said, she thought Kodak had the feeling it knew more than its customers, which is a bad thing to think about. Okay.
Well, doesn't Apple say that?
Yeah, Steve Jobs, I think, had that model, but he I think, is a much different case in the sense that it's a newer company, a technology company, and I don't think Apple has the same kind of structure that Kodak
No,
does.
just that one comment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Blockbuster. Everybody's heard of Blockbuster? Okay. It opened in Dallas in 1985, so again, we're talking about 20 or 25 years of success. A guy named David Cook figured there was a market for a family-friendly video rental store. They were all kind of dark, dingy places associated with pornographic videos before that time. And he put 8,000 video cassettes in displays. He built a warehouse to fulfill, so when the movies came out, he got the cassettes, copied them, and sent them off. And things are going pretty well. He designed the stores with films for the neighborhood. He franchised and expanded to 19 stores, but then he ran out of capital. So he needed more money to expand, and he went to Wayne Huizenga of Waste Management fame. And for $18.5 million, he bought half of the company. The interesting story is here that Huizenga didn't have a VCR. And he did a little research on the company and finally decided to buy in. And they grew pretty fast, okay? 1997 to 2004, they went to a $4 billion company in sales, 3,700 stores. I'm sorry, $4 billion on market cap, $2.2 billion in revenue, and they opened a store every 17 hours someplace in the world at their peak. That's pretty fast growth. Okay. Well, Blockbuster stock was getting hammered by the stock analysts because they didn't think that Blockbuster's management saw the future, saw what was coming, which in 1994 wasn't very clear, I will admit that. And so Huizenga thought that these new technologies were years away, but he didn't like what was happening to the stock price, so he went to Sumner Redstone at Viacom to sell Blockbuster. Viacom bought it for $8 billion. Okay? They slimmed the company, and instead of investing in the company, they used the cash flow, which was nice for Blockbuster, to pay off the debt they had from buying Paramount. So Viacom, later on, Redstone had what's called buyer's remorse. He called it the deal from hell. Satellite movie services were impacting his business. There was a lack of new product. There was a decline in movie rentals. So he had an IPO for Blockbuster, and he sold 80%, I'm sorry, he kept 80% and sold 20%, which kind of led to the end of Blockbuster, it turns out. Because, well, first of all, let's talk about his new CEO, John Antioco from Taco Bell, which is an interesting move from Taco Bell to renting videos. He decided to rent video games, and by 2001, they had 8,000 stores in 27 countries, 89,000 employees, $5 billion in revenue. But Carl Icahn popped on the scene. Icahn is a fairly well-known corporate raider. He buys companies and then tries to squeeze value out of them that he thinks is not there. And he bought 10 million shares. Antioco did not get along very well with Icahn. He lost a proxy fight for the composition of the board of directors, and Antioco left. So in 2010, Blockbuster declared bankruptcy. It was bought by Dish Networks for $200 million and some liabilities. About 1,000 stores remained at that time. 2013, January of this year, Dish said it was going to close 300 of the stores that it had acquired. So it left about a third of the, leaving less than a third of the stores that it acquired. They laid off 3,000 of the 7,300 remaining employees. So we've gone from 89,000 to 3,000 employees. Okay. So what happened? Well, there were a lot of disruptions for Blockbuster. On demand, cable providers scheduling premium movies, so you don't have to get in your car and drive to Blockbuster and pick out a video and come back, and you don't have to take it back and return it afterwards. Pay-per-view, okay, stream movies to viewers. There was also illegal file sharing going on, and still going on, which hurt Blockbuster. Antioco had an interesting attitude. He thought it was DVDs that were the problem because Walmart wanted to sell them for $20 or less. And therefore, why would you pay $4 or $5 to rent a movie when you could buy it for $20? But here's the place where I think they went awry. Antioco was skeptical of the Netflix model. He didn't think movies by mail would work because he figured that it was an instant gratification business. So if you wanted to see a movie, you were going to go to Blockbuster. You were going to buy it, or you're going to rent it, take it home, look at it right then. People don't plan far enough ahead. Well, that turned out to be a mistaken notion of human behavior because a lot of people said, hey, let's make Friday night movie night. And we'll just take and we'll get one, we'll look at it, we'll put it in the mail on Saturday, and by Monday or Tuesday, the next one will come. And we can do that, we can schedule that. Finally, they got religion and tried a mail order business, but they couldn't make it work. Now, I've got to scratch my head a little bit at that because mail order DVDs don't sound all that hard, do they? Netflix was a startup. Now, Netflix developed some sophisticated technology for this in the sense that my DVD arrives, gets scanned, okay, and up pops a label for the next person who gets it, so it gets Ben's label put on it and dropped in the mail to him. And Netflix actually worked with the post office to design its mailer so that it could be processed without breaking the DVDs or jamming or anything else. And it's got, if you look at a Netflix envelope, it says nearest distribution center. So the post office knows where it's supposed to go. Blockbuster couldn't figure that out. They eliminated late fees because everybody was unhappy about late fees. Netflix doesn't have late fees. You just don't get your next movie until you send back the one you've got or the two you've got, depending on your plan. And that cost $200 million. And then he wanted to get an online business, and he said that would cost $200 million. Now, I have a hard time figuring how it was going to cost $200 million to get into the online business. Netflix didn't spend $200 million to get into the online business. So something happened here. But Viacom looked at $400 million and said, no, they're nothing. So they never got a viable online business underway. Okay, so that takes care of Blockbuster. Now we go to Borders, which is a slightly smaller failure because it was a smaller company. Worldwide, there's their Singapore store. Started in 1971 by two brothers. They had the Offerings for Each Community. That's their store in Ann Arbor. Kmart acquired Borders in 1992, merged it with Walden Books, and of course, when that happened, Borders senior manager left, which is not unusual for a buyout. And then, of course, Kmart, realizing how well it had done, spun off Borders. So, 2003, Borders had 1,250 stores. They were very aggressive. They went out and started installing cafes with Seattle's best. They might have looked at technology as well as coffee, but they didn't at this point. They closed half of the Walden bookstores in 2007. Finally, in 2008, they opened what they called concept stores that had a digital center offering some services. But when did Amazon come along? 1995. So what took so long? Okay. Borders Online was struggling. Okay, so they figured out that they had to sell books online because Amazon was doing quite well selling books online. Thank you very much. So what do you do if you're having trouble running it yourself? How do you get an online store on the web? You go to your rival. You let Amazon run it for you. Okay? Short-term win, long-term disaster. You never learn about the digital transformation that's going on because you've given up and you've asked Amazon to run your website. I'm not sure, Amazon will do almost anything you ask them to do. I don't know if they did their fulfillment too. They did for Toys R Us, they did for Target for a while. Whether Borders did its own fulfillment or just outsourced the whole thing, I don't know. But they never got into that online sense. Their last profit was in 2006. Income dropped by $1 billion over the next 4 years. The end came, 2008, Borders said it was going to sell the chain. They had to borrow money at 12.5% interest to keep going, which is kind of a steep interest rate. In 2008, it created a Borders personal publishing site for authors to publish through its website. Okay, that's fundamentally disruptive to publishers, but again, it was pretty late to start doing that. Okay. Stock dropped to 53 cents a share, and board of directors and senior management shuffled. In 2010, they opened an e-book store. When did the Kindle come out? People were buying Kindles. They were buying other kinds of readers. Okay? And they didn't have a reader. They had apps to go on other people's readers. So again, we're sort of dipping a toe in the water, but we aren't really jumping in the pool. February 16th, Borders filed for bankruptcy. Creditors did not like the only takeover bid they got, so they went to an auction. But the sad thing is they had an auction and no one came. There were no bidders. So they started closing their remaining 39 stores, 17,000 employees gone. So if we add up the total of Blockbuster, Borders, and Kodak, we're well over 200,000 people who are out of work because of the failure of these firms. Okay. So too little, too late. Borders management didn't recognize anything going on. That's the for sale sign on Borders headquarters. So everything is gone. Managers didn't understand the likely technology. When they tried to respond, their efforts didn't work. So I call these the three amigos. And I just want to compare a little bit their bankruptcy. Okay. Obviously, this is the grade they all get. So they all face disruptions. Kodak from its own invention, which is the irony of all of this. Blockbuster from Netflix and DVDs by mail and streaming movies. Borders from Amazon, clearly. Okay. They all failed to adapt. Kodak could not change its mindset. Its senior managers couldn't convince middle managers. There's a wonderful interview that was held with George Fisher, who was brought in from Motorola in the 90s. And the board of directors of Kodak thought he was a digital man because he turned around Motorola. In an interview that he had that's on videotape, he says, I realize now that we were never able to convince middle managers that we had to be serious about digital. Okay. Blockbuster had managerial turmoil. Borders, too little, too late. So it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, and I don't think these things are exhaustive, and who knows if you could have done this. But I think Kodak could have been more consistent. It would have a digital division, and then it would fold it back into the company, and then it would reorganize and do something else. They never found the right formula for where to put digital and how to develop it. A separate unit, Christensen, in his book on the innovator's dilemma, suggests that you got to get the innovators away from the people who aren't the innovators, the ones who have been doing the job for hundreds of years, and get them in a place where they can work without interference from that. Massive organizational change program. You know, Kodak may just be an example of a Greek tragedy, okay? It may be that after 130 years and the kind of organization they had created that stifled innovation, that there was no hope when digital came along. You'd like to think that maybe they could have done something, but I don't know. And I think I have a class that I'm teaching now in strategic and transformational technology. I had a class this afternoon, and this theme keeps coming up all the time, you know. And I said to them today, I hope one thing that you get out of this class is that you go away not being afraid of cannibals, okay? Because if you're afraid of cannibalizing yourself, it's going to happen by somebody else. I think it was Steve Jobs who said, if you don't cannibalize yourself, someone else will. Okay? And that's a hard lesson to learn. I think it's a lesson that higher education is about to learn. Okay? Blockbuster, well, I mean, if you got all these, I mean, the three personalities involved in Huizenga, Sumner Redstone, Carl Icahn, good luck. Okay, if those are your managers and the people who are trying to run the organization. They were in denial about Netflix, and when they tried to do things, they couldn't execute. Borders, nobody really predicted the technology there. They didn't take a few risks. I mean, think about this. Amazon came along in 1995. Bezos was not shy. He talked about the business model. He created a lot of buzz around the company. Borders is sitting there. Borders had a lot more money than Bezos did. Right? How much of a risk would it have been to hire a bunch of guys out of college from Ben's computer science department to create a website to sell books? So they lost $1 million. That time wouldn't have hurt them very much. But instead they did nothing. They said they waited and they watched. So Barnes & Noble and Borders took about 2 years, as I recall, to get up sites to sell books online. You don't want to do that when you're fighting a company like Amazon that's scrappy and coming up with new ideas all the time. Okay, so here's kind of a summary of the disasters. Denial, Kodak was incredible in denial. They were the champions there. The others were right alongside. They all had histories of success. They'd all done reasonably well. Resistance at Kodak was massive. Blockbuster, the CEO didn't quite get it. Who knows what was going on with Borders management. The mindsets, hey, we're a film company. People will come to the store to get their videos. People will always want physical books. Brand, okay, Kodak, one of the greatest brands around, Blockbuster, Borders. Sunk costs for Kodak were really large. Profitability, Kodak had lots of money and were very profitable. These others had problems with profit because they were up and down all the time. And they all really suffered from this sort of lack of imagination about what was coming and what they could do about it. So I would give them an unqualified F. The tragedy, as I've said, a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of wealth was wiped out in all of this. I think the root cause is that management failed the company and the shareholders. This is not a technical problem, it's a management problem. Okay, so now we get on to the interesting part. Disrupting higher education, subtitled Coursera and Me. This is the way we've taught since, well, I guess Socrates had more seminars, didn't he? So let's say after Socrates, we got into the model of larger lecture classes, okay, so it was more cost efficient. So that's the lecture. This may be the future lecture hall. There was an editorial in the Washington Post about 6 months ago. The title was, "The Lecture is Dead." Okay? So is that what's going to happen? Are we experiencing our Napster moment right now? And I think the answer to that is yes. So let's do a little definition here. We're all familiar with physical classes. Okay? An online class, as we're going to define it here, is one that takes place totally online. And we're going to see different varieties of that in a few minutes. A blended class has some online components. So the class I'm teaching now that's blended, the students watch video lectures, and then we come to class to discuss, generally in business school, we discuss cases in class. In a MOOC, which is a massive open online course, you have a much different model in which the students have to watch only videos because you can't talk to that many students directly. And you're looking at numbers of the James Green's course, I think started out with about 80,000 students in it. My course is more like a MOOC seminar. I only have 12,000 students right now. Okay. Now, a common feature of this, and this is why they say the lecture is dead, is the flipped classroom. Our education colleagues have named it that. If you've ever been to the Khan Academy, you know what I'm talking about. If you hadn't, I would encourage you to just look at your browser, khan.org. Solomon Khan has developed a series of very short videos. He doesn't appear in them. It's all a tablet with him handwriting on this. And he has a whole series of lessons on different topics. He started out with mathematics. It's actually, the system is being used in a number of grade schools. I don't know how many around the country. The flipping part is that when probably you and I were in class in grade school, the teacher would tell you how to do problems and send you home with problems to do. Well, in this case, you watch Solomon Khan at home on the internet, and you go to class and work on problems. So you flip the classroom, and that gives the idea of, hey, is somebody like me standing up in front of a room full of students the best way to communicate knowledge? Or is it better to have the students learn that on their own, where they can replay and look at things over and over again, and come into class and we talk about the problems they're having, and we do problems together. He has a number of topics on there. I admit to being confused by DNA and cells and all that sort of thing. He has a quite nice, rather long one, about a 20-minute section on what's inside a cell. And he draws pictures of it and that sort of thing. He sounds a little bit like Mr. Rogers, if any of you remember that. Very non-threatening, very quiet. I'm trying to model myself after him in my videos. Okay. Now, one of the things I really like about this model is everyone who does it agrees that online education puts more responsibility on the student and away from. Why is that? Well, you can come to my lecture and you can kind of close your eyes, but you're still there. I'm not going to check up to see that you've looked at the video lecture. Okay. That's your assignment. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. I don't think you're getting as much out of the class if you fail to do the videos, but that's up to you. Okay, some definitions. Asynchronous online. This is the predominant University of Phoenix Strayer kind of model where the instructor and the student never meet. Okay, so it's done pretty much all through the internet, through downloading things, through doing assignments, and so on. Okay. This is a synchronous online class. I have a colleague at the Kelley School, Business School at the University of Indiana, who's been in this business for a long time. He uses a product called Adobe Connect to do audio classes with his students, not video, which means he can handle a lot more students. If you're going to do a video class, which is now possible, I found that I was limited in the number of students that the technology would handle, and quite frankly, I could absorb on the screen in front of me. And then the blended, which is the one which I think has really great potential for a lot of schools because you have the advantages of the flipped classroom and you still have physical interaction with your students. So in general, you're going to see people looking at lectures offline or online, but at their convenience, and then you will probably have mostly physical, but maybe an occasional online class session. Now, 3 years ago, I would have come here and told you about the evils of online education, because I didn't like the idea very much. I didn't get into this business never to see a student. Some days I would love that, but most of the time, I wanted to interact with students and talk to them. And at that time, most online education was the for-profits, right? And if you've done any research or read anything about the for-profits, they were kind of a funnel. They used students as an intermediary to get student loan money from the government and funnel it into their pockets. And they left these students with huge, huge student debts and very little job opportunity as a result. The federal government has cracked down on that market. I think it's conceivable that MOOCs will kill it off, and I'm not going to be very sad about that. So my Apple moment. My Apple moment actually occurred about 20 years ago when I saw a video of the future put together by Apple. And it had a faculty member sitting at his desk, and on the wall across from him was the largest screen I'd ever seen, flat screen. And in a window, or a series of windows, there was a student, and they were having class. And I said, that's cool, I'll do that. But it took 20 years for it to happen. And this is the result. This is my fall class, and this is a class session. The students have put up a PowerPoint presentation for the case that we're covering. They've offered a poll down here. Okay? In here, I'm madly trying to put discussion notes in. Over here, there's this chat going on among the students, and these are videos of them. They're live video streams. There actually aren't 3 people who are or 4 people who are missing. Something about the recording of this system blacked out a few students. It may have been too much data for it to handle. They were actually there and alive during the presentation. I found that I could handle about 24 or so students at a time. This is a system called Adobe Connect. The University of Maryland has just arranged for a 1,000-seat license. Anybody with a university ID can go set up a classroom or a meeting, send the URL to other people, and they can come into the meeting like this or come to a class like this. I found that the Achilles heel of this system is bandwidth. So I asked my students to upgrade their internet connections if they had any room left to do that, if they could up it, if they were Verizon or Comcast and go to a higher speed. The people who didn't have high speed had trouble. Their video wasn't terrific, sometimes their audio dropped. So it really needs high bandwidth to work. Okay, so who wants an online degree? Well, I think it's pretty natural for graduate students, because it means that you don't have to give up a job if you've got a job. You don't have that opportunity cost. And it also gives you great flexibility if you're in a job where you travel. So what woke me up was the University of North Carolina, which I discovered on my sabbatical, was planning to start an online MBA program with interactive video. In my research, I found a website that listed 400 online MBA programs. I was absolutely stunned. Then I looked at the schools. South Dakota State Normal College in no place, South Dakota. So there are a ton of programs out there that, well, you get what you pay for in these cases. This was the first program that I saw where I said, this makes some sense. You can interact with the students can interact with each other now. And so we can offer a program that looks like a virtual MBA experience. And the Smith School is planning to do exactly that very soon. There should be an announcement about it. Okay? All right. So, graduate degrees, definitely. How do you make up for what's missing? Well, you do a lot of team projects. In our program, we'll probably have the students come for a week at the beginning of the program and a week at the end, physically on campus. We do that with executive programs, and that works fine. So there will not be totally online in the sense that they'll never see each other physically or meet. Okay? Blended in part-time programs, I think, is another natural. We torture our part-time MBA students. They have to go to class from 6:30 until 10 o'clock at night after working all day. Now, if they don't want to do that, they can take a leisurely Saturday and come from 8 until 6. I personally question how much learning takes place after about 4 or 5 hours of intense classroom work. So what if we blended that? What if they did all the lectures online at their convenience, and you got together in class to really talk about and discuss the issues? So I think there's a great potential for this in part-time programs. Okay. And I think in the full-time programs, we're going to see blended as well. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because my 5-year-old grandson sits on my lap and works his father's iPad. And I say, this is not going to work, what we're doing now. And he has to, even probably to grade school, he's probably not going to expect what's going on in grade school. So we divide the world into 2 types of people, digital natives and digital immigrants. We're all digital immigrants. We came to this stuff later in life. The digital natives are growing up with it. And technology is going to be as natural to them as a morning cup of coffee is to you. So my fearless prediction, in less than 5 years, the majority of college classes for students in part-time and full-time programs will be blended. I happened to mention this to an assistant in the department, and she said, "Nah, Hank, you're wrong. 3 years." And I said, "I don't think we can move that fast, probably." Okay. Most successful and rigorous online programs will feature a combination of synchronous and asynchronous online learning. Now you can say, well, how are you going to scale a program if you can only have 24 or 25 students on Adobe Connect at a time? And it's not just bandwidth, it's my bandwidth. It is different than what I expected. I said, hey, I can have a class of 50 students, and I don't have any problems with that, except the grading. Okay. But how do I do that online? It's very hard. I thought online would be simple because I'd sit back in my chair and watch them work. No. Okay. You're watching 25 windows, you're watching chats, you're watching things, polls, all kinds of stuff. It's like a three-ring circus when you're trying to moderate one of these things. Okay. So it is not, at least now, best work. But also, I've taught the old way for a long time. This is the first time I tried it. I would hope my second or third class would go better, and I learned too. Okay. Okay, so what's a MOOC? This is our MOOC page on Coursera. University of Maryland has 5 courses. I'm sorry the last one didn't make it on my screen. This is the one, James Green's, which I think has 80,000. This is my Disruptive Technologies course. Okay. So what are the problems for a MOOC? Well, how do you evaluate what people are doing on a MOOC? Objective tests are easy. They have machine-graded tests. They have programs that are machine-graded that you can have people write programs. Essays are a little tougher problem. So they're experimenting, or actually not experimenting, they're featuring something called peer grading. So for my course, I have 2 peer-graded exercises. That'll determine whether you have a certificate or not. Are we going to grant credit for these things? Right now, almost no one does. But again, I would say within 6 months to a year, there'll be a lot of credit because the pressure is on to do that. And Udacity, which is one of the providers, has an agreement with Pearson Learning to have students come and take proctored tests at Pearson Learning Centers. Antioch College is going to pay a royalty to Coursera to use some of their courses. I'm assuming with some sort of a local instructor to run discussions or other things, and to give the students their quizzes and tests. So I think it won't be long before we get credit for this. So here are some questions. Will we end up with a few star faculty in the world teaching all the courses? Will there be one economics course in the world taught by the world's greatest economists? Well, I know the answer to that is no, because there's no way the economists could agree on who the world's greatest. So that's not going to happen. Okay. Will faculty become TAs for Coursera faculty offering an online course? I wouldn't like to do that very much. But there is a faculty member at Southern Georgia who called me up and said, I'm going to require your course for the students in my course. Okay. I can't do anything about that now, but I hope if that happens in the future on a widespread basis, that they pay royalties to the University of Maryland, right? That seems only fair. How many courses does a student have to take from Maryland faculty to get a Maryland degree? So my student comes to me and says, Berkeley is offering a course on 3rd century Japanese literature. We don't seem to have one of those. I want to take it for credit as a part of my program. What can I say? Sure, take it. What if she wants to take 75% of her courses from other schools? I'm not sure about that. Will there be an aggregator of MOOCs who provides credentials and a degree? We'll come back to that in a minute. But think about the potential of this. There was a faculty member at UC Irvine who last week was removed by the university from his course. He was an emeritus professor of economics. I don't mean to pick on economists if there are economists in the room. He was an emeritus professor of economics who was appalled that his students all didn't have an intense interest in what he was teaching. He went to the discussion board. They weren't all on the discussion board. Some of them weren't taking the course seriously. He missed the point of this. Okay? The point of this is to make education available around the world and to give people who never have a chance to go to a first-class university an opportunity. That's the original model of the MOOC. What we're doing is we're changing these MOOCs to fit universities as they exist today, and the potential is there for them to be very disruptive to us. Okay? This is the Tom Friedman quote from just a few weeks ago. I can see a day soon where you'll create your own college degree by taking the best online courses from the best professors around the world. You'll pay a nominal fee. You won't pay $100,000 for your college degree or $200,000 for your college degree. It will change learning and teaching in the pathway to employment. I was talking to a man who has a consortium of U.S. business schools that work with business schools in developing countries. He was asking me about MOOCs, and he said, in a lot of the world, a certificate on the wall is really very valuable. It doesn't necessarily have to be a college certificate. It could be a certificate saying, this person has just completed 20 MOOCs. So, what might happen to the university of the future? And not very far future. Let's take a scenario. This is my friend Alice, who's a student from Hagerstown, and she visits the College Park campus in the fall for 2 months. She meets her faculty and fellow students. She lives in a hotel dorm, which we've just created, and she takes 3 half-semester blended courses. And then she goes home, and she gets a job at Starbucks, and she takes 3 online courses living at home. And then she comes back for January and February and takes her lab science courses. And it goes on and on and on. In the beginning, anything we do online is not going to reduce the cost of education. It's going to be a massive investment to get us to provide this kind of education. But for the student, there's a possibility that you could think about reducing some of the costs. It means they can work part-time, they can stay at home part of the time. It doesn't help our economic model, right? Because we count on that room board and tuition for the full year. But this is what things come to. Okay. So now, what should a university do? Should Maryland get into the MOOC business? We don't have a binding contract with Coursera. There are open source platforms for doing MOOCs. Coursera has been brilliant at marketing. They've got a lot of courses. They just announced agreements with European colleges. They're going to have a number of foreign language offerings, courses in foreign languages to us. They've been brilliant in marketing to students. 2.7 million students look at Coursera for the courses they want to take. So should we be in that business? How quickly can we convert our classes to be blended? Who's going to make the decision that we should do that? What kind of classrooms do we have? If we blend classes, okay, we could get potentially a 40 or 50% reduction in the utilization of classrooms, so we would have more flexibility in scheduling classes. What kind of living facilities do we live in? There's a dorm going up outside my office window. I keep saying, don't do it. Don't do it. Make it a hotel. How do we help students design a program of study? Okay. How many non-Maryland courses can you take? Okay. So here's another problem for us, credit hours. What does a credit hour mean for a student watching a video? Most people report, and I found this true, that you got a compression 30-40% over delivering a live lecture to putting one on video. That reduces the contact hours by this metric, but does it reduce the learning? So what's the metric that we use in the future? How do you calculate faculty workloads if contact hours go away? If I want to scale up my course to handle 50 students, I've got to have 2 discussion groups, 25 each. Well, that's twice as much discussion time. Do I get extra credit for that? I don't know. Dean would probably say no. But what kind of support do you have to provide for instructional design? Right now, most of us are doing video lectures. Almost all of Coursera is a video lecture of a camera on a faculty member talking with PowerPoints, and usually using a tablet and a pen to highlight things on the PowerPoint or make notes on it. But there are other ways to deliver online education, and some of the companies that are partnering with schools to do that will develop multimedia and focus less on the faculty member. That means help. I have no idea how to do that. What kind of technology support? If you're going to do this, you're probably going to need 24/7 by 365 consulting, by phone at least, for technical problems. You can't have 500 students at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday not able to access Canvas. You've got to be able to help them. Okay? So for students, it's great. Flexibility, all kinds of opportunities. So I think what we're going to have is a hierarchy of education that's going to be a little different than the one we have now. Okay? The really fortunate ones, the privileged students, are going to live on a campus for 4 years and take classes. That's the historical model. Okay? The next category is students who come and go like Alice. Okay? Third will be students who take mostly online courses but maybe visit the campus every now and then. The fourth tier is students who are fully online, who really never get the campus experience. And the last group may be MOOC U. So you take a whole series of courses for which you get some kind of a certificate, or I am willing to bet that some institution someplace will offer college credit and a degree for doing that. Okay? For us, a lot of work. Okay? I mean, resistance to change is justified here. But we got the ability to influence a lot more students. The challenge, I think, is to make the courses using new media as good or better as the traditional courses, particularly in terms of learning. And Ben and I have been discussing how do you measure it. We don't really measure learning now very much. Maybe you could say by how well students do on graduate school admission tests, but I'm not sure that's a relevant measure. So in summary, for the first time, I think we have a technology that really can transform universities. And my question is, can universities, which are classic bureaucracies, become nimble enough to make this technology what we call competence enhancing? And I had to struggle to find a sentence in which I could use the word university and nimble together. So can we really morph our business model, okay, to adapt to this disruptive technology so we don't end up like the Three Amigos, but in fact we end up taking a leadership position as we move forward with the technology. So that's all I have to say. I'll be happy to take some questions or discussion. Yes, sir.
If we have less students living on campus, how are we going to fill Comcast Stadium with 70, 80,000 people every Saturday?
You know, that's going to be tough to do. And what happens if some of your athletes want to be here part of the time?
Yeah.
Maybe we'd actually get control of college athletics. I didn't say that. But that is an issue, right? Campus organizations. But, you know, we do a lot remotely now, and students do a lot remotely. So, you know, students can use Adobe Connect for activities. Yes, ma'am.
So you talked about bandwidth being an issue, so
Yes.
that implies access issues as well.
Right.
Then I think that you left one more bottom class like tier of students on that list out, being people who can't afford or don't have the infrastructure access to broadband internet.
Yeah. That's a real problem, but in terms of the scheme of problems, it's a relatively cheap one to fix unless they happen to live so far away that there's no possibility of high-speed internet. And I think in this country, with satellites and other things, I mean, think about the scholarship you have to give a student to pay tuition and living expenses versus how much it would cost to give somebody a scholarship for high-speed internet. So I think we can do it here. I was talking to this fellow for the Global Network of Business Schools, and he was saying, well, you know, in Africa, you got to think about delivering this on a smartphone. Can you do that?
Well, even in this country, though, we still have broadband access issues too as well. Like in my graduate program at the library school, I do a lot of research with the Native American communities, and a lot of reservations in this country are left out of access completely
Right.
because telecom companies don't see the profitability in going there.
So you may have to find, and this is a day and age which is hard to get new government subsidies. The old ones seem to hang around, but I think you probably have to have some sort of a government program. Like there was a program to bring broadband to schools, 10, 15 years ago in the Clinton administration. Actually, it's longer than that now, but it was trying to be sure that at least every school had one broadband connection. And so you'll have to find places like that. I actually, after I talked to him, I did a video, I played a video lecture on my iPhone. I'd never done that before, and it wasn't terrible. I mean, if instead of having 2 levels of PowerPoint, you kept it at 1 level and maybe 4 or 5 lines, you could read that on the screen. So with a little bit of redesign and thought, you could format classes to go on a smartphone. Yes?
Do you think all this technological changes can possibly threaten the existence of universities?
Absolutely, absolutely. Daphne Kohler, who was a co-founder of Coursera, was here.
No.
She was here last fall, and someone asked her, who do you threaten? And because she was sitting at the University of Maryland, she very diplomatically said, we don't threaten the Stanfords and the Marylands and other schools like that. The schools that we threaten are the very small, underfunded private schools that are out there around the country, because they charge really high tuition. They don't have star faculty. So how do they compete in this world? If Tom Friedman is right, if he's talking about sort of a bare bones credentialing thing, but I could start a university, in fact, maybe I'll do this. I could start a university without having to necessarily have PhD researchers as my faculty. Maybe I would have at the retired university, if the people who retired at 50 or 60 and wanted to keep their hands in things. And they could be discussion leaders online with Adobe Connect sessions, and people could take Coursera courses. And we would find some way. Coursera now is looking at measuring how people type to verify that's who they are. And so we could find some way to solve the identification problem, and then we could offer them a degree. Now, probably taking a few years to get accredited, but that model isn't going to be that far off, I don't think. And I think that's disruptive to us, okay? Because we are not the highest price producer. We'll leave that to the privates and the Ivies, but underneath that, you know, we're getting up there, right? What's our out-of-state tuition for someone, undergraduate?
40-something thousand.
Yeah, 40-something thousand. That's almost an Ivy League tuition. Okay, so we're not exactly the low-cost producer in all of this, and so I think we are threatened by this. Particularly when every day you pick up a newspaper that says screams $1 trillion in student debt. You know, some of that is thanks to our nonprofit brother, or our for-profit brother. We're still guilty. Yes, sir.
So there was a comment you made about Kodak that they thought that they were in the film business, but it turns out they're in the imaging business.
Right.
That's why they lost out. Do you think that there might be an analogy with the university model, that maybe the universities think that they're in a certificate giving business, but in reality they're in a job training business? And who knows, maybe the MOOCs will happen or not, but what if the headhunters and the people who are looking to hire eventually start skipping the university model altogether?
That's a threat. One of Coursera's revenue models is that you can say you're willing to have employers look at your record on Coursera of the courses you've taken. And so they're trying to be a little bit like a monster.com. So what's the next step? Well, maybe you could upload your resume. Okay. And we'll have your resume and the courses you've taken. So yeah, I think that's a threat as well. I mean, I would like to think that undergraduates are not focused on jobs, but I know that's not true. I mean, a lot of them are focused on jobs. But you'd like somebody to get an undergraduate education for the education that it brings, and then at least I would like to then see them go on for a graduate degree if they want to specialize in a job.
A question. For example, like the University of Maryland University College has the cybersecurity program 100% online.
Right.
Now, how successful is there a way of telling how successful this program has been for the people that they have taken this course, say for example, versus taking any class and under income-wise?
You know, that's a really tough question. I mean, you could do something like try to get some income statistics. Business schools get rated by starting job offers, okay, which is kind of silly because somebody who graduates from a business school in New York is definitely going to make more money than somebody who graduates from a business school in Washington if they're taking jobs in the government or someplace else. None of that takes into account cost of living or anything else. It's kind of an imperfect measurement. I think, what's the University of Maryland's reputation based on? Why would somebody say Maryland's a good school? Faculty would be part of it, and what else?
The credentials of the incoming freshman class.
Okay, so you look at how good the students are coming in, and maybe we don't add any value, we just age them for 4 years and push them back out again. Okay. I think part of it is also based on your alums, right? Okay. So if your alums are doing really well, and maybe that's also you were good at selecting the people who became your alums, then I think it redounds to the reputation of the school. But that takes a while, right? I mean, you don't want to do that just on starting jobs. You want to do it 10, 15, 20 years after they've graduated and see how they're doing. So to me, it's a real challenge, and it's a real challenge if somebody says to me, prove to me that the students who took your online course in the fall did just as well as the students who took the physical course you offered in the spring that was the same course.
One relatively straightforward way to analyze that imperfectly, though, is to look at the success of those students in the following courses. So if that
Yes.
course is a prerequisite to a next course, look to see how the students did in the next course and compare that to the ones that took the online version versus.
But then how do you know that those students taking the class are those students?
But you can track the individual students. The problem is there's all kinds of, I mean, it's not a controlled study, it's a self-selected, so there's a major sampling in self-selection here.
I mean, to me, one of the hardest areas to do research is education, because if you've taught, you know that every class is different. I've taught 2 sections of the same course and gotten radically different evaluations from the students, like the same day. And you know, maybe there's a presentation effect, maybe I was stale in the second one, maybe I was better in the second one from practicing in the first. But you can walk into those 2 classes and the discussions are different and the personalities are different. There's something called the Inkatha project that somebody famous is running it. Is it Bowen from Ford Foundation that left it? I'm trying to remember. We participated in it, I think, and they tried to get a large number of classes and instructors.
There were 6, so Ithaca.
Ithaca.
They ran a study looking at 6 introductory statistics classes. One of them was offered here at 6 different universities, where some of them were traditional and some of them were blended, where they would watch the video online and then have fewer contact hours at the university. And what they found, and then they did standard assessments at the end and showed that learning was comparable or better in something like half the time of learning hours. Close to half the time of
For
learning
online.
hours. Yeah, for the online. And there's a few essential reasons. One is that, right, as Hank hinted at, it's more efficient to watch video online. You don't have to go back and forth to class. The videos are more highly produced, so they're more specific. There's not pauses and not questions and answers, which makes it less broad, but more focused. And so you can tend to do it, cover the same material faster. And the students can skip if they already know it, and they can repeat if they don't know it. So for all those reasons, it tends to be more efficient. And there's actually, I read a study looking at a meta-study of 200 different online courses before the MOOCs in the previous 10, 15 years. And it depends on the details. Some do slightly better, some do slightly worse. But overall, the average is that online learning seems to be comparable to face-to-face learning, at least in the core content.
Great.
What about the research component of a university? I mean, teaching is only really one half of what the academy does, and a certain amount of research and learning to become a researcher is kind of apprenticeship. It's kind of working with somebody who does that research and really kind of becoming, watching by doing, learning by doing, kind of traditional apprenticeship model.
I think the research university in this country is here to stay as long as it can, because most industries don't do original research or basic research. They do applied product-oriented research. It's heavily, obviously, funded by the government. But some of the student tuition, I think, probably pays the bills for doing research. Okay, so anything that threatens that income stream is a threat. And
the government may not want to see itself in that role indefinitely either.
That's right.
There's a lot of people who feel that that's
And-
not a
and
valuable way
again,
to spend tax dollars.
the pressure we've got on costs, okay, which I find, I keep thinking, well, we probably could be more efficient, but would we still provide the same level of education if we do that?
Professor, I think I understood kind of like the way you try to put the way of seeing disruptive technologies from the point of a business and from the point of an individual.
Right.
Because, for example, in our case, I'm an individual, and the disruptive technology would be the online course that I would be taking, and it benefits me. But from a business perspective, is another way. How can a business, for example, what measures would the business take? I saw the ways you were seeing, for example, like analyzing Kodak and the other one, but how can, I think that those three businesses kind of like didn't appreciate the disruptive technology.
Right.
As somebody in the company that, as a CEO, how would you make sure that gets across so they understand that that the disruptive technology is the future, otherwise the company will collapse?
Well, I think a CEO has to be in that situation a pretty strong leader and has to get that message across to other people in the organization, which is not easy. But if you look at some, I didn't put up the companies that were successful because it's not nearly as dramatic to talk about successes as it is to talk about failures. I mean, there are some companies that have been successful at this. In the 1990s, IBM morphed its business model. Small servers, PCs, and other things were having a devastating effect on their sale of mainframes, which were responsible for a huge portion of their profits. The mainframe guys ran IBM. I heard that when the PC came out, they had to approve its pricing back in the 1980s. Okay, so they hired a consumer products guy from I think it was R.J. Reynolds, right? Nabisco, a guy named Lou Gerstner, had been a consultant. The plan had been the chairman at the time, John Akers' plan was to break IBM into 5 smaller companies to try to ensure its survival. So Gerstner came in as a consultant and IBM customer and looked at that and said, geez, I don't want to do that. It was bad enough having one IBM to deal with. What would it be like to have 5 of them to try to coordinate? Because everybody points their fingers at everybody else when there's a technical problem. So we said, we got to do services. People want a solution to their problem. So we should be a problem solution company. We shouldn't just be a hardware software vendor. And he changed the company. And I heard the way he did that was it got down to all the managers. They started their meetings with, hey, our objective is to become a services company. They sort of pounded it into people's head. That's what we're going to do. And they became very successful at that. If you look at them now, they make nice profits from the hardware business, but it's not the component it was in the past. The real business is smart planet, smart cities, selling solutions to industry. Another good example is Apple. Apple, 20 years ago, was an also-ran computer company, right? It had less than 10% market share of the PC business. And then they said, I don't think they woke up one morning, but Steve Jobs and the others, they said, why don't we become a consumer products company? And so suddenly they started offering products that you and I had to have. I didn't know I had to have an iPhone until I got one. The same thing with an iPad. Now I can't live life without one. Okay, so they did a really nice job with product design, with auxiliary services. So you have an iPod and you have an iTunes store. Brilliant. Okay, all this stuff works together. And they put tremendous pressure. Look what they've done to BlackBerries. Okay, sell your BlackBerry stock if you haven't. This is
So I want to talk a little bit about innovator's dilemma.
Right.
And actually, Apple is a good example. Innovator's dilemma, my understanding of the core idea is to be willing to cannibalize your profitable business to support the new business coming up from the bottom. And this is something that Apple has been surprisingly, unusually willing to do. And so their iPads are notably cannibalizing their high profit margin laptop sales.
Yep.
And the stock analysts don't like that because they're less profitable, and Apple's doing it anyway and pushing it very far forward, presumably because they recognize that the alternative is that somebody else will do it and they'll lose their laptop sales to somebody else, or better than lose them. So my question is, you've been posing some interesting questions for us, and it sounds more or less like we should create a better version of ourselves. The way you pose those questions. An alternative way of thinking about the question is perhaps we should propose a cannibalized version of ourselves. So if Apple is right, and the way to stay in business is to replace the excellent laptops with the mediocre iPads, right? Mediocre for some things at least. Should we be replacing, or at least offering as an alternative to our excellent education, a very inexpensive, much worse education? Because if we don't do it, Coursera and others are going to do it. And so it's better for us to cannibalize from ourselves, own and understand that business, hopefully do both, but not get eaten from the bottom from Coursera, who will work its way up and then take over the whole thing.
Yeah. I go along with your analysis in the sense that we have to worry about a Coursera eating away. I think that we do have people who are offering the low end now, which is the University of Phoenix and Strayer and those places. And I don't think we want to get into that because it mixes up our brand. Apple has still managed to maintain a very positive brand and perception among customers of its products. So I don't know how many people who have an iPad are saying, geez, I wish I bought a Power Mac, okay, or a MacBook Pro instead of this iPad. So I think it's a slightly different situation. As I look at my hierarchy there, we've always tried to be near the high end, and that's what our reputation and brand are based on. And I think our challenge is to keep that up while still being relevant and maybe cost effective is another word as far as students are concerned and what we do. So I think we're going to have healthy competition with others. I want to see this, and you know from our Provost Commission, I think the answer to should Maryland offer a whole bunch of MOOCs is yes. I think we should offer a large number of MOOCs. We ought to get the provost to subsidize that, to provide resources for it, because it gets our brand out there. People around the world know who we are. It should help us to attract students to our full-time program. And if we get to a situation where students all around the world are taking MOOCs and giving royalties to the school that offer them, we want to have some product out there. Right? We want to have a good balance of trade. We don't want 2 or 3 schools to capture all of the MOOCs. And then I think we're cannibalized. Then I think if nobody wants a University of Maryland MOOC or has never heard of the University of Maryland because we don't have any MOOCs, then I think we're in trouble. So I think we have to do more than 5. Yes?
Is it part of the whole MOOC thing to give away education to people in parts of the world that simply cannot pay for it? So there's a large free ethic out there, free access, free materials, free whatever. But I was listening to former chairman of Lloyd Martin was here giving a lecture a few months ago, and we were talking about this and how what saves us from being Kodak or whatever. And it's like our brand. It's like you give away, you get on, maybe you do the MOOCs and you have a free component that's out there, just we're participating, we're demonstrating something, but you're not giving away University of Maryland degrees. Right. To do that, you still have to pay a fee that keeps us going and pays the faculty and so on. All the research grants and maybe that's something that we need to monetize more effectively to substitute for a lot of the tuition stream that might be leaving to instead of giving away our raw research, as the president's really emphasizing entrepreneurial opportunity and exploitation of our research results so we can commercialize those. Just being better at generating revenue stream from that to replace the lost tuition so we can still provide that quality education product but not have to charge as much perhaps. So I think it'll continue surviving at this level because we've got more research dollars.
I think the MOOCs are going to end up in sort of a 2-tier model as you suggest. I mean, Coursera and Udacity are profit-making firms. Coursera has venture capital behind it. edX, the MIT Harvard venture, is nonprofit. But they're going to start charging for the use of their open source software, which almost seems contradictory. But I think what will happen is that there will be a 2-tiered pricing where the low tier may be free. And that may be for students in foreign countries where they're not going to have a certificate or a degree. And maybe we should do the open source and have a University of Maryland MOOC selection of courses. We might market it heavily to the citizens of Maryland to show that the university is meeting their needs. And we might also do some marketing around the U.S. so we can bring in some out-of-state tuition and students, and even worldwide because we have a lot of foreign students. And so let them sample something for free. Just like you can download many software products and use them for a month free, right? And then you can decide whether you want to pay for them or not. And so I think we could get creative and do things like that to make up for this. I think part of the problem is, and I like the discussion tonight because it's not all about denial. Okay? I mean, this is serious, and there are people on this campus, in my building, who think that this is it's going to go away and it's not something you have to worry
We were talking mostly about college level courses. Would it be a wise thing to do for the university to start offering essentially high school level courses as MOOCs and get the brand out that way?
That's been discussed in the Provost Commission that Ben and I are on, that it's conceivable that MOOCs could end up replacing advanced placement courses, or that they could be remedial courses for high schools. If we're remedial courses, then we're going to go head to head with the community colleges, right? Because they'd serve a purpose for remedial education as well. Yes?
So here's the thing about disruptive technology is it's not like it comes out of nowhere. I actually went to a community college and I had many television courses. So you could just tune into the Yuba Community College channel and get the exact same education I was getting. You could look up the professor's email if you really wanted to chime in. You could get the slides, you could get everything, but you didn't get the credit. You had to pay for the credit. You paid for the credit, you didn't pay for the course.
Right.
And that's been, they've had that television station for over 20 years now. And they've always had that channel. And it was not a high school or a remedial course. It was, I got, university level college credit for a television class.
Yeah.
And it's just a wider reach now. That's all it is.
Yeah. I can remember when I was a child in the 1960s when television was going to be the new way to educate people.
Well, and from what year? 68, 69, we had Sesame Street, Electric Company.
Yeah.
There was also CBS broadcast Sunrise Semester
Yeah.
at 6 a.m.,
Two hours
which was the same kind of thing, but national broadcast of college level courses. I know my father was a physics professor, and I listened to him once. It was at 6 a.m.
That was the only time.
But he taught, but the stuff has come around come around for a while.
Then there's the Open University in Britain.
Right. Yeah.
I have a question about whether there's a possibility to mine really extraordinary students out there. I forget where I heard it, whether it was at that lecture or not, but somebody was saying that they had, out of 100,000 students that were on this Coursera program, they had about 200 that were better than their top student that they presently had at their university studying with them. Well, okay, that's a huge population, but I mean, you have these potentially extraordinary academic students around the world that have no resources perhaps, but just could be transformational if they had the opportunity.
Anant Agarwal, who is the head of the MIT edX joint venture, likes to tell the story of the MIT circuits course, which was the first one. He said it's a really hard course and a lot of people don't do well in it. And there was one student who got a perfect score on their online course. He was a high school student in Mongolia. The teacher there had organized them to take this course. And I'm trying to remember if they offered him a scholarship to come to MIT. I don't know if they ought to have if they didn't. So yes, that's right. I mean, you will find some talent out there. And, there were some university officials who fortunately are no longer in positions of influence who said about Coursera and MOOCs is, these don't benefit the citizens of Maryland and therefore we shouldn't be involved in them. I said, hey, I don't, when the citizens of Maryland pay 100% of our budget, maybe that's something we should consider. But do you think the citizens of Maryland would be unhappy if we discovered 10 great students in Africa and Asia and that sort of thing and brought them here? Fine. Yes?
What about the aspect of the university as being, especially for undergraduates, kind of a place where young adults kind of are learning to live on their own and forming communities and interacting in person and kind of having a safe place to grow up and really learn academic, but also learn a lot of social skills and networking and all that.
I was shocked a few years ago to read that the largest number of college students in the United States do not live and attend a 4-year school on campus. So in my hierarchy, I said the fortunate students are going to be the ones who live on campus. Maybe the ones like my woman in the scenario who live part of the time on campus. We had a memo from the president of the University of South Carolina that got sent around to us on the faculty of the business school. And he talked about the fact that USC brings in over $100 million a year in online class revenues. But he said we never want to replace the undergraduate experience with that. We think undergraduates should be on campus. And I think that's great. I think if you can do that, if you can afford to pay for it, if you can afford the time, the opportunity cost of not having a job, I think that's the ultimate way. I mean, our children graduated before all of this happened, but I would have still had them go to a 4-year college if they, if they wanted to do that. So I think that's what you want to aim for. But it's very clear now that that's not going to fit 100% of the students in the country. And so, my wife feels the same way. Okay, she says, why are you doing this online stuff? And I said, well, okay, you say the 4-year college experience is great. Okay, what if the choice is not the 4-year college experience, but it's doing this or no college? Well, then it's a different choice. Okay? And so I'll go for the one that's online and doesn't let me live in a fraternity or sorority or play football or do something else. And that's unfortunately the way it's going to be, right? I mean, we've got to have choices for people. Every school can't be Harvard, okay? And every student can't go to Harvard, okay? And can't do the work. So we have to have this hierarchy, I think, where students can get something that's appropriate for them. Other questions? Thank you very much. I've enjoyed chatting with you.